Civilized Society.
Welcome to the Silver Eye Society. It is another episode of everybody's favorite series, Peasant Radio. This Peasant Radio has a purpose. This Peasant Radio is going to be a little spicy. I recently saw a movie that no one else can see unless you have access to the director's file on her computer, which is how I saw it. It was a film screening sponsored by FAIR, which is a nonprofit. And there's a Q&A with the director afterwards. The director is called Meg Smaker. That is her name. It sounds weird to say she's called that. It's her name. And she was interviewed by Barry Weiss at this film screening. And I watched this film. Fine film. Basic documentary. The kind of documentary that I would have loved and just eaten up when I was like in my, pre-2000, whatever, 12 Bernie socialist era. It is largely about how the United States government has contributed to the radicalization of terrorists in the Middle East due to terrible practices, inhumane practices, namely the running of Guantanamo Bay facility. So everybody knows about that already. We don't need to rehash that. They're fucking people up in there. It's really bad. It's wrong. It's unethical. Pretty much everyone agrees at that. But what's interesting about this film is that it follows several ex-terrorists or people that were just training with Al-Qaeda or adjacent to that world. And it follows them to a rehab center for terrorists in Saudi Arabia. So from the facility in Guantanamo to this rehab center. And it interviews them, speaks to them, tries to understand their perspective, tries to understand the journey, what it's like to be wrapped up in that world. There's different paths that brought each of the people who are interviewed to that center. So in one case, there's a guy that really didn't do anything, but he was the brother of a really high-level terrorist group leader. And so that got him put in Guantanamo. And there are other figures that genuinely did do terrorism, some for money, some for ideological reasons, some for the pure passion of it. Either way, this film does what all good documentaries seek to do, which is take a subject that most people know nothing about, oftentimes a subject that is very hard to empathize with, and show them to you in the most humanistic light, to the point that you find yourself at the end of the film feeling genuinely connected and concerned for ex-terrorists. This film is called Jihad Rehab. I watched it. It was incredibly uncontroversial, pretty banal, a great film, but not spicy, not controversial. It was in the Q&A that I learned that this film is not available to anyone, not because it wasn't successful, not because people don't want to see it, but because it was pulled out of a bunch of film festivals after Sundance, who originally chose to screen it, issued an apology for the harm that they did by showing a movie. Then you had South by Southwest drop it. And why? Why all of a sudden this movie that is a pretty basic documentary got blacklisted and is no longer able to even be distributed? Just disappeared. Well, I actually started looking up the movie on Twitter, and I found the controversy, the storm. It's basically a bunch of basic ass people, like no one of interest, complaining that the movie is Islamophobic and that it's just wrong for a non-Muslim director to make a movie about Muslims. That's it.
And that's what it boils down to.
That's basically what our controversy is.
So can I How would you like me to enter this conversation?
Okay, so
Because there's three different broad paths that I could speak to, but I think that last thing you said is maybe the most important part of it.
Let's enter this conversation with tact, because there's a lot of things that I want to do in this episode. I want to talk briefly about this climate that is censoring art. This is censorship, period. When the masses of a country cannot see a film because a minority of people have forced institutions to drop it, that's authoritarian. That is censorship, period. So that's a problem. Then we also have these claims, right? That it's like the movie is bigoted. It is dangerous, quote unquote. I found myself liking terrorists at the end of the film. So for what it's worth, you could make that claim for maybe other things, but you actually can't levy that claim at this movie. It is an incredibly humanistic film. It makes you like people that have bombed people. Like, it is really an empathetic film. So those accusations, while they may hold merit in some other sphere, they don't actually hold merit against this film. But there's another part of this episode that's going to be different, I hope. And that's where you come in, Justin A.W. Blair, co-host of the Silver Eye Society. We need to talk about what we need to do as people that want to live in a free society, that want to make their own choices about what art we consume and what beliefs we form about that art. We need to decide what we're going to do about this growing climate where a minority of MFA graduates get to decide what an entire population gets to see and believe about a film. So if you'd like to enter at that point in any regard, feel free to pick up where you'd like.
They did not decide. My issue, I read, you brought this concept up just last night, so I didn't have a great deal of time to research it. And I also want to say I haven't seen this film, so I'm not going to speak to the specifics of that. But the institution of the Sundance Film Festival and all the other ones that decided to no longer screen it, whether or not they had accepted it or not, now it was screened, from what I understand, in Sundance original, right? The festival. And then they apologized, and that made it kind of difficult for the film to get into other places. I don't know. They
pulled it from other places.
Okay. So I've read this long letter by these people that you're talking about as MFA majors, and you're not incorrect about that, I don't think.
Briefly, this letter that you're talking about, I need to introduce it. So this is ultimately what got the film pulled from a bunch of festivals, prevented from distribution, and motivated Sundance to release an apology for showing a film at Sundance Film Festival. It's a letter signed by a bunch of MFA type people. Like, I'm guessing most of them are filmmakers. Most of them claim to have Middle Eastern or North African heritage, etc., as if that somehow gives them the right to decide what other people believe and see. But that's the clown world we live in now. Notably, the producer of the documentary, Fauci, is one of the people that has signed this letter. And that's important. It's important for you, dear listener, to know the quality of people that are making decisions about what you should consume. So this letter basically says, this movie has hurt us. This movie is dangerous. We don't like it. Therefore, no one should have access to seeing this movie. It also lists demands. There's a bunch of demands in this letter. So they essentially attempt to take an institution hostage by placing demands upon the institution, some of which include mandatory Islamophobia training for all Sundance employees. just to give you an idea of how far-reaching and how entitled the people that signed this letter believe themselves to be.
So, I actually read the entire thing.
Whoa.
And it was difficult because it's very long. And as with all of a certain type of academic artist, the prose is terrible. It's this jargon. It's basically a mix of jargon and guilt, and also kind of childishness. But I'm used to that. I've seen that a lot, and we've all seen that over the years. I just wrote down a few words, key words that I'd like to give to people, so then if they ever start reading stuff like this, they can recognize what it is and discount it. Problematic, that's an oldie but a good one. Allies, equitable, accountability, platforming, safety, the most important one, carceral, which good SAT word. Power disadvantage. So these are some of the phrases that are in this letter.
Boy.
So
It's
we
like
know.
a
So
bingo card.
So I'd like to say something. Now, again, I have not seen the film, so I'm actually not going to make a decision on whether or not I would agree with them on some of these things. I can't because I haven't seen it. It wouldn't be fair for me to do that. And the one point that they put at the very beginning, which I could at least, if I thought this was done in good faith, I would maybe even consider, is they say, technically none of these people, this is what they say, I haven't seen the movie, technically none of these people were charged with a crime because they were apprehended through these types of things that we set up after 9/11 in order to basically incarcerate people without a trial. And so then if the filmmaker frames them as ex-terrorists, and I think they do some sort of thing where they put like the rap sheet or whatever there, and that's to some degree unfair. Now, one second. So that sounds reasonable for a moment, but then here's the problem. I read the whole thing, and I already know that there's no reason I should believe them because everyone who writes in this style and with this terminology is a fucking liar. And so they may even have a point on that one. I don't know, but I discount it because I know the real play and I know the real trick here, and I reject it. Go ahead.
And you have the right instinct because I, as someone that had the privilege to watch this essentially banned film, it specifically shows a scene when it introduces each person who's being interviewed and says never convicted of the crime. Like it says, it lists out the crimes that they were, apprehended for, and then makes a point to say right there, never actually convicted or charged with the crime or whatever. It says that. So this to me is a completely bogus criticism. It's obvious in the film. The whole point of the film is to show that these people were never actually properly charged and yet were held for, in some cases, decades. That's one of the main points of the film. So right off the top, this criticism is false.
So, yeah, and that's something that I could actually, this idea, because I lived through this time period, and I have been against the idea of Guantanamo Bay and the idea of holding people without a trial because I'm an American, and that's un-American to me. Now, you can have all the arguments you want about international law and this and that, and we could go into a big whole bunch of other stuff with that, which I'm not prepared to do or qualified to do. But as an instinctual manner, I was always against the idea of picking people up in a battlefield and then also using enhanced interrogation techniques, which is just a euphemism for kind of light torture for the most part. It's not the rack, but it's not...
It's torture.
It will fuck people up. It will fuck people up, and it will manipulate them into saying things. That's why they used it. I reject that also. But maybe to get to so we don't go into a 9/11 thing, to get to the point of this, one of the main points is that I don't blame these people totally because they have a political goal. Now, they pretend they don't, but I know what it is. And in essence, it's the philosophy of intersectionality. And here's a proof of this. The person that made this is a woman, correct?
Mm-hmm.
So 30, 40 years ago, maybe there would have been a debate about there needs to be more women documentary filmmakers. Women are not represented equally and well enough in documentary filmmaking, right? That's an argument people probably had 30, 40 years ago, okay? Well, the logic of intersectionality does this now. It says, but she's a white woman, I'm assuming, right? Mm-hmm. I don't know what her name is, Meg.
Yeah, she is.
Right. Okay, so see, that's no good for intersectionality, because now, yeah, okay, you clicked off the box of woman, so great, but you're not the right religion in this case. And then they conflate, which is extraordinarily funny to me, they conflate religion with race because it's convenient for them to do, which a lot of Muslims in, say, the Caucasus, southern Russia, would probably take issue with, because there are plenty of races that are represented in that religion. It's a world religion. Really, what one of the main points these people come down to is what they really want is they want a woman Muslim director, because then it would have been okay. Here's the funny thing: wait 10 more years, okay? Because then this is the logic of intersectionality, which will break everything down to, it shatters everything, but it can never stop because that's its logic. So next decade, there'll be a Muslim woman director, documentary filmmaker, but they won't be trans. That'll be the problem. And then 10 years after that, there'll be a trans, used to be female, or whatever you want, Muslim director. And then the logic of intersectionality will say that will not be acceptable, because there's another underrepresented community, which is really, I'm not saying it's imagined or created. There are people that fit these boxes of identity, but it'll be that actually needs to be represented over this.
And this is the problem to me with this, is that it is a cover for a power play. Because what it ultimately does is say, if you don't fit the box that we have created for you today, you have no claim to your own actions. You have no right to show your own film. We take precedence. That's what this letter ultimately does. It says, you as an individual do not have the right to create this film. We, as the proper identities that we have so decided them to be, have the right to decide that other people will not see this film and that you will not screen this film. So this ends up being an endless game where every day a new rung on the ladder is set and you have to climb, and every day you have to ask, how high do I climb today to be allowed to have my basic rights to free expression?
I have a solution, but it's a solution that's unpalatable to most people, and this is going to play in to the idea of why I ultimately actually don't blame these people. I ultimately blame the Sundance Film Festival, South by Southwest, and all the other ones that caved into pressure from a special interest group who, hey, I'll give them credit. They organized themselves and got together, and they got a very long letter, which was probably painful to have to write. And they organized, and they did that. And to some degree, that's their, that's their right to do. Mm-hmm. And if they even just said, we don't like this film because we think it was bad because you did this, or that, that's critique of film. It's fine. I have no problem with it. May not agree with it, but great. But that's not what it's about. That is not what it's about. And the problem is this, though, that I actually want it to happen more. Because there's no, let's be honest here. Here's the way we can go to a point where, I'll say this. I want people to make films regardless of their race, gender, outlook. But I actually want people, I am an American. I live in the country of America, the United States of America. I endorse people making absolutely, they can make whatever film they want. It could be bad. It could be, I think that it's okay for filmmakers, if they want to be a racist, if they want to have a racist filmmaker. I think that Osama bin Laden, instead of blowing up the Twin Towers, I would like to see a documentary made by him. Why not? Why can't, it would have been a better career path in some ways. But that's my point. If you actually care, see, this fight against this, you're going to lose. So the only way you can win this fight is to say, I actually don't care. And I live in America. You have the right to speak. You have the right to create films. And if you create a film, regardless of who you are, even if you're an abhorrent person, I support your right to do that. In other words, if you're a racist and you want to make a documentary, there's the camera. Go for it. Make a good one. We'll see. If you're a terrorist, there's a camera. Make a good film. Do it. What? And then show it. If it's not a good film, don't show it. But until you go all the way back to that core principle, if that's what you really believe, and most people, by the way, don't really believe that, which is why this whole concept of free speech is it's a rearguard action. You're always fighting just to get back to this point of like the mid-90s, where there was this kind of general idea of, oh, you can make what you want. It can be offensive. It can be this or that. This is a losing battle.
Well, I'm sick of this shit, okay? I can't speak to how upsetting it is that we've reached this point in a culture where I have to go to a screening to watch a film that was pulled from film festivals because a handful of people with MFA degrees who make good money, okay, these are not oppressed individuals writing a letter to Sundance. Like, you're fine, okay? This is not like the actual immigrant community that's suffering and whatever and is like in poverty that are saying, please, this film is harming us. People with real problems don't write giant letters to Sundance talking about getting harmed by a film. That's not what people with real problems do. That's what people who want power do. And this is what this is about. This is a handful of people who have essentially self-appointed themselves as the arbiters of art. They decide what you get to see. And you don't get to even consent, let alone have knowledge of the fact that a film that you might have seen, might have liked, might have expanded your mind from watching. You won't even know that it was disappeared. That's the crazy thing about this, is I just happened to find out about this. What happens to most people in this case is that their world just shrinks. Because there's these people working behind the scenes, demanding that institutions censor things. And the general public doesn't know that. They don't know that their world is being shrunk by this small group of people who believes that they are more entitled to the rights of what we see and what beliefs we form than other people. They don't believe in autonomy. That's ultimately what this is. There is a belief that a human adult should be able to decide what they consume and decide what they believe about what they consume. These people don't believe in that. They believe that they should decide what other people consume and what other people believe. And Sundance and South by Southwest have capitulated to people who are ultimately, at the core, authoritarians. This is the logic of authoritarianism. A small group of people that decides that they have more rights to decide what other people consume and have access to and believe than those people themselves.
And they succeeded. So give them their due. They succeeded. So now here's the reason why I don't get mad at them anymore. Because a bunch of them, I don't know who they are, and I'm not going to speak to who they are specifically. They may sincerely hold these beliefs, some of them. Some of them may just be playing the game. Because the reality is, when I look at the list of the people who sign it, what it really is a bunch of filmmakers, and it takes time and energy to make films. So, you know what? Props to them for doing that. I didn't recognize the names of any of the films. The reality is, you talked about money briefly there. There isn't a lot of money into this. And that's why you get artists that are basically people who tend to come from kind of upper middle class backgrounds who get foundation money to make movies that no one really cares to watch. Now, that's not to say they're bad films. They very well may be. If there was one about an Islamic hairdresser or something, could be great. I don't know. To pretend that's not for a niche audience is delusional. But But that's fine. It could be a good film. My point is, there's an aspect to this that is a bunch of people scrapping over like grant money and foundation money, and it's a kind of revolt of peasants and peasant radio here in Civil Rights Society. In a way, what it is a hardcore left-wing kind of revolt of filmmakers who are not successful trying to become more successful. That's the part of it that's powerful, because if they can get all these people guilted into giving them more money to make more films that no one wants to watch, then that's good. But here, I don't blame them. And briefly, I need to say, the blame goes on to Sundance and South by Southwest for capitulating. Why do they do that? Because they don't actually suffer the potential reputational damage for them not giving up is higher than for giving up. Do you see what I'm saying? Like, they can just give up. A few people could resign and they don't say anything. And then they just go along getting to be on the board of the Sundance Film Festival, and they hang out in wherever this place is in Colorado or something. And they are nice and comfortable and they don't have to worry. And it's just one person's film that gets sacrificed. They don't care. And you know what? I don't care either. If they don't care and they won't stand up for themselves, then I hope that they fail. And I want it to come faster. I want the trans Muslim filmmaker protesting these people tomorrow. I want it, and I want this to just go. Let's just get it done with. Let's just go and get it done with. And then if Sundance and South by Southwest, if it just devolves into this constant apology thing, it's not interesting to me. And it's not interesting to anyone that actually likes movies. And they'll fail. And they should. And I look forward to their failure because I want cowards to fail. Yes. And that's what they are.
I agree. And I think that when you see an institution that is supposedly committed to film, what the fuck is film? It's not activism. It's not this kind of like equity. That's not what it is. It is humans telling stories. That's what film is. You can make your film about whatever you want. You can decide that your film's purpose is purely activism, propaganda, whatever it may be. But at its core, film is an art of humans telling stories. And if these institutions will not stand by what the core of film is, they should fail. They should have nothing but these kind of garbage, propagandistic, activist films screening. Enjoy that. That crowd will eat itself. That's what they do. So it'll ultimately collapse on itself. My problem is that I don't want to see artists that actually make good art, like this film. This is a good movie. It does exactly what a good documentary is supposed to do. It's informative, it's emotional, it's creative. It's a good film. I don't want to see that be the sacrifice. And I don't want to see other people's rights to see that film be sacrificed in the meantime. So as we wrap up here, what's really the next step? Because like both of us have spoken about, we can't just kind of sit by and talk about why free speech matters. We know why free speech matters. We're not going to convince these people that sign a giant letter with a bunch of buzzwords that pretend that films that humanize some of the least easy to empathize with people is a dangerous film. That's beyond. That's a loser's game. So what is the real next step here? What do? I mean, we need alternate institutions that actually believe in film and will stand for it. But in the meantime, what's the game plan? Like, what do you see?
Well, Sundance, from what I understand, and again, I'm not speaking specifically as film. I didn't see it. Sundance originally did select it. And they have the Sundance film thing, and then they have this other thing, which is kind of a foundation grant awarding program, which even the authors of this letter say focuses on getting marginalized people's stories heard, right? So that's where all the Sundance kind of grant money goes to, all right, already. But the film festival is a separate entity somewhat, I guess. And they picked this film. Apparently they thought it was a good movie. And they have this thing where they say, they at least say, we believe in the artist's vision as an individual regardless of the rest of this. They didn't believe in it enough, apparently, because to some degree I'm not really sure what Sundance did, though, besides run an apology, because they had already showed the film. So to some degree, I can't blame them as much as the other places that then pulled it, because they did it. Then they did the little trick where they say sorry. And so there we have to think about what is next to some degree, because I actually think this is lost. And I know this for myself as a person who submits fiction writing, and I've watched it over the course of 10 years. I'm at the point now where I'm submitting stories to a thing that said, we are a trans-led horror magazine, and unfortunately the field in which you have to fill out your name on our there's an engine where you fill out your name and contact information. It is gender specific, and we want to apologize ahead of time. Another magazine that I sent to, it was a horror magazine, which had a long list of things that were horrific in horror short stories, which they're getting from the public, and said, please let us know ahead of time if any of these subjects are in the horror story, because it might damage our readers. They might be injured by the violence of a situation in a horror.
God.
Which, to be fair to them, I get. There's also some weird people that are in that write horror that just write the most despicable, grotesque thing, and they think that's art. And that I almost can accept that, because I understand that there are people that have done that, and I think it's probably difficult. But anyway, the point is that I think, there's no money in any of this. In writing fiction, there's no money in documentary filmmaking, unless you're at that kind of highest level. And so, of course, this is going to devolve into nothing more than a bunch of people chirping about essentially a political agenda, because there is no economic engine to it. So this is what happens now, right? You get Disney, you get Netflix, all these companies that have kind of signaled a lot towards which I don't like this term, but the woke type mentality, right? They're starting to lose money now. That's the only thing that's going to matter. That's why, to be honest, the fight amongst documentary filmmakers, this kind of pseudo-Marxist intersectionality kind of stuff, that's actually going to win. But I say seed that ground, because there's no money to it. Joke's on you. The only you're gonna work for 2 years to make a film that a very small audience is going to see, that takes up your life, that actually makes you no money, and the only way you're going to continue to propel yourself forward is by grant money. And then that means you have to be a very specific type of person, because when you're writing and you want money from grants and foundations, I would wager in the year 2022 that I myself, looking like this, have a little less of a chance, potentially, getting a grant from the Sundance Film Festival or whatever, than perhaps some of the signatories to this letter. But that's speculation. So
yeah, a lot of this is like a guise for infighting over resources. And I think that's what the most detestable thing about it is that it's very clearly, it serves a secondary purpose, which is you annihilate the competition, but you're doing it in an intersectional way. You're starting with the white men first. It just so happens that they are your competition, but you're just cutting it all down, but for equality. Maybe that's in a way the dark definition of equity. It's cut down all your competition till you're all at the same level of poverty and eligibility for grant money. So this is, I guess what you're saying in some regard is that we need an alternate economic engine to support the arts, because as long as it's in this format, this is the kind of problem that it's going to be. And these institutions are clearly captured by that. They're not in a position to actually have a spine and say that art should stand based on its merit, and people should be the one that decide whether they want to see that art and what they believe about it, not a handful of MFA graduates who are angry that it got a grant or it got into Sundance and their fucking film about Fauci didn't, or whatever the fuck it is.
But it makes sense. And that's why I'm saying that the mindset of trying to reverse this is actually a losing battle, and one I'm not really interested in participating in, because the incentive for an institution like Sundance is always going to be to cave to this pressure. Because the reality is, if they said no, they'd briefly maybe get a little blip of people that are kind of like centrist type freedom people who are like, yeah, good job, but on Twitter or something, right? But they're not going to get that. They're not going to get those people to write a long letter and then get it distributed into all these like generic news sites that millennials read that have made them suicidal. They're not going to get that. So the incentive is always going to be to capitulate. That's a stupid battle to fight. So we have that's not wise.
I still say to send the letter. I'm still going to write a letter to Sundance and South by Southwest that disparages them for having no integrity and for being cowardly and not standing for the arts. It's disgusting. They should not call themselves allies of the arts or anything. It is really an embarrassment, and it is actively harming culture. It is actively rescinding people's right to access culture by allowing a handful of neurotic individuals to appoint themselves as the gatekeepers of art. Anyway.
But I respect the power move to some degree.
Yeah, because it works.
They did appoint themselves, and they did they got their way.
Well, let's see what we can do about that. If you've watched to this point of the episode, I encourage you to let Sundance, to let South by Southwest know how you feel about being held captive by a group of MFA graduates who've decided that they are more entitled to decide what you can see than you are. Let them know. And I think I'll write a letter, might as well. Why the fuck not? And then maybe I'll make that letter public so that other people can share it too. Because there is like a place for pushback, at least. We can't just sit here and say, well, there it goes again. Well, I guess we'll just wait for it all to crumble. Yes, let them fail as they deserve to fail because they are cowardly institutions. But in the meantime, let them know that you see them failing.